Right now, we're live, and that should be. I think we should be able to cover the stuff for both sections, and I'll be able to put that up as just if you're tuning in and you were the 8 a.m. class when I didn't have power that wasn't cutting out every couple of minutes. This is the Tuesday afternoon class, which will cover the same stuff and a couple of things that were in addition. Because could you refresh my memory? Who was it that brought up conspiracy theories? The last lecture on Tuesday.
I mean, that's kind of like all of us.
Was it everybody? Okay. So there's general, can I get by a show of hands, either a thumbs up or a thumbs down emoji is fine. Who is kind of interested in exploring that topic just a little bit as far as, okay, we got to know. Okay, perfect. Good. Because I was kind of like, I hadn't taken into account, I'll get to all this stuff later. How about this? Let's do about 20 minutes of grammar. And I have something planned for this. And I have some resources that I wanted to share with you and a few points of discussion to kind of put things in perspective from a kind of properly balanced university perspective, rather than just an open format where anybody gets to say anything they want. Like how does this conversation that is happening in America happen in a university standard level discussion, research paper, exploratory issue, that sort of thing. So we'll put all that into perspective in just a little bit, and we will solve every problem that you have when we start that in just a couple of minutes. So if you can hang on about 20 minutes, let's talk about some grammar issues and sentence structure issues, and we'll get going. So I'm going to go into the trusty screen share. We're going to go to grammar worksheet number 4. And what I'm going to do is probably, I promise this is the last time that I'm just going to kind of randomly call on people. I have a system worked out, but I don't have the kinks worked out. It'll be up and running by next week. So we'll have a system of randomly assigned names for you to answer a question. But right now I'm just going to basically keep asking for volunteers and occasionally call on somebody to just kind of get some feedback here from people. So we're going to go and open up on my screen share grammar worksheet number 4. There it is. And we can take a few, yeah. Okay, so here's the thing. Can I get basically a couple of volunteers to go back and forth just a little teeny bit? Please hold on one second, sorry. Okay, so if you're thinking about going, let's just kind of go ahead there and jump in there, and let's assign a couple of people a couple of these. Like, let's take 1, 2, and 3. Can I get 3 volunteers? Who wants number 1?
I'll do it.
Great. Let's take number 1. Grapes are grown in California. Are we active or passive?
I said passive because it's California who's growing the grapes.
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. It's not California that's growing the grapes. They're grown in California, right? So what's our verb? There you go, right? Grown, are grown, right? So the person that's growing them, the entity that's growing them, even if you wanted to call it Mother Earth, it's not California that's growing them. That's not even the meaning of this sentence, right? The meaning of this is that somebody or something grows them. So you can say vineyards grow grapes in California, or wine lovers grow grapes in California, or you can say Mother Earth grows grapes in California. Those are active, but here it's passive because the person doing the action, and remember the action is not in California, the action is all the stuff connected with grown and the helper verbs that are the helper auxiliary words that are helping it out. So you're absolutely right, that is a passive statement, and that's a good use of passive statement as well. The knee-jerk reaction is to not use passive tense because your English teacher told you not to. Pretty much in the same way that I kind of discourage people typically from using the semicolon, because there are so many problems that go along with using that, including you're using a semicolon when you don't really need to. And that's also a problem because it has an effect on your reader. even if it's technically correct, but you certainly don't need it. And, you know, I see 27 semicolons in a one-page paper. It's a little, you know, it's a little off-putting. So with this one, you may not know who's actually growing the grapes, and it doesn't matter because the grapes that we're talking about, this is in direct response to a question such as, are these grapes grown in California or New Zealand? These grapes are grown in California. That's all we needed to know. We didn't know whether it was Stag's Leaps that grew them or Kenwood that grew them, and it doesn't matter. So that's a good proper use of the passive voice. Excellent job. Who wants to do number 2?
So Professor Starr,
Yes.
active voice would be like grapes grow in California, right? Because like the
Yes.
grapes are the noun and then they're doing the verb.
Yeah, because the grapes are doing the growing there. Grapes
Okay.
grow. I grew up, right? That meaning I did the growing. But people have grown up. Those are kind of, we're getting into, before I make up an example that doesn't make any sense, the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, cool.
Yep. So, I mean, really, you got to put it in, just if you think of this one example, I made a mistake and mistakes were made. If you just remember that about active and passive voice, then you can kind of like put it back in that form, because we're going to get to some other ones later that have a couple of auxiliary verbs in them and sound a little wishy-washy, but you have to look at action. Is the actor doing the verb thing, or is that actor that's connected with the verb absent? If it's absent, it's passive. If the doer is there and it's connected to the verb, then it's active. So when you say mistakes were made, even if you say, I'm going to write this in here right now, mistakes were made, and you were a little wishy-washy about it, but then you said, like, by me, this sentence right there is also too late. You have not made it active by adding the by me. This is a preposition, and the noun following the preposition means, here's your general rule, the subject of a sentence is never in a prepositional phrase, ever. By definition, that's how they work. So the subject of the sentence is not connected to the made a mistake. In that fundamental way that in this sentence, it is. I made the mistake. Here, mistakes were made. Afterwards, you're describing who did it, but it's not that's not this person that's doing it. So that's the key there. By, from, to, those are the prepositions that I talked about a couple weeks ago. Identify the preposition. If that noun is in a prepositional phrase, then that noun is not the subject of the sentence. Mistakes is the subject. It's a noun. It's a thing that happened. Now it's an event. That counts as a thing. Does that make sense, Justin?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, that's the only real tricky part, I think, to remember about this whole active passive thing is you have to kind of go back to the link that I put when in the Grammar Essentials workshop, or Grammar Essentials Google slide, where there's a list of giant prepositions there, because the prepositions are what are going to throw you off there. So you have to learn to recognize the prepositions right away. So just as I said, you don't have to look at the articles. They're not really going to matter for us unless it's a specific problem. We can talk about that. But everybody should please pay attention to prepositions because they cause problems. They do this a lot. Let's go to number 2. Who wants to take it?
Got it.
Please, JC, go ahead.
I said passive because the hamsters can be kept in a cage by someone.
Exactly. It's not the hamster that's doing the keeping, right?
Mm-hmm.
The hamster's not keeping people in a cage. Some person is keeping a hamster in a cage. The hamster is receiving the action. So if it's receiving it, then it's passive. You're absolutely right. So you can say, John keeps the hamster in a cage. Or you can say, the hamster was kept in a cage. But those are going to be the difference between active and passive. The hamster was kept in a cage by John. Still passive. By is your preposition that makes it already too late. You've lost the battle by the time that the doer of the sentence the preposition is followed by the doer of the sentence, that preposition makes it null and void. It's still passive. Great job. Let's do one more right on this little thing before we move to the next section. Who wants to do number 3? Got a volunteer?
I'll volunteer.
Please, Josh.
The party has already started is, I believe, an active sentence.
Excellent. Can you tell me why?
Well, the party is not receiving the action. I mean, a party cannot do an action, but in this case, the party, forget the already, the party has started. That is an active phrase.
You're absolutely right. Strip out all the unnecessary words that are helping the main verb, and you have identified the main verb. It's start. So what starts? The party. Party starts. The party has started. So you can say the party may have already started, and the may have already is just stuff that's connected to started. It gives us more information, but it doesn't change the subject and the verb relationship. So you're absolutely correct. Good job.
Thank you.
Let's go down to, oh yeah, the rewriting of it. This is kind of good. So what we have here are active sentences that we want to take the actor out of and see what it sounds like if we rewrite them. Do we have, how about anybody, with the first, any example? Let's get any one of these if you want to pick a favorite one. Volunteer, please.
3 cats.
I can go.
Oh.
Okay, let's try Eli next. Pick one.
The 3 cats were rescued by Julia.
Exactly. You have just made an active sentence passive. So remember, the tense has to do with when something happened. And then there's all these other words that, without getting into the technical terminology, there are basically several pieces of information that how you deal with the verb is going to tell you these pieces of information. Active and passive is voice, which is different than the kind of information that comes across with tense. So this is not a tense. This is a voice, and it's just that. One of the aspects is a poorly chosen word. One of the pieces of categories of information that verbs show us in a sentence is when something happened, the intention of whether it's known or unknown, whether it's a completed action or not, and whether it's active or passive. This one of whether it's receiving the action or doing the action. And so you don't have to change the tense, but a lot of those things have to do with the verb tense, but this isn't one of them. They're just kind of separate issues. Who was next? JC, did I see you up there? I just saw you flash on the screen for just 2 seconds. Do you want to do any of these other ones?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, give a shot. Just anything from 1 to 10.
The blue car was crashed by Maria.
Ah, great. The car was crashed. I crashed a car. Maria crashed a car. Very direct. A car was crashed. The car was crashed. Exactly. You're taking emphasis away from that one. Can we get one more volunteer? Anyone that we haven't done already?
I can go.
Great, please, Patrick.
We'll do the poem one.
Mm-hmm.
The poem was learned by Alex.
Yes. So I can't think of a lot of great uses of any of these particular sentences where the passive voice has a good reason to do it. But you hear it a lot with those other things like, presenting evidence. You can say, things were done. Or a study, when you say the studies have shown studies are doing the showing, that's still active. But it's when you really want to kind of back it up and just take the responsibility out of it. I'm having a brain fart on coming up with an actual scientific statement where that's justified, but you'll see it if you ever read any scientific documents. It's kind of used, especially if you don't know who supported the hypothesis. So the hypothesis, was shown to be correct. That'll work. The hypothesis was shown to be correct, even by scientists. But obviously it's scientists who are doing the thing. because that's who tests hypotheses or hypotheses. So here's the thing. Can I get a volunteer? Does anybody want to field this one? This one's a little bit more in depth.
I could take it.
Take the first part. Correct or incorrect? A.
A is correct.
Okay. Read it out loud
Because-
for me. Let me see how it shows. Let me see how it flows.
Tomorrow, the homeowners association will vote on whether to chop down a tree that blocks the sun from the pool, to trim back the tree, or to install a heater.
Mhm.
So the reason I think it's correct is because it's to chop, to trim, or to install.
Good.
They're all in the same. They all have the same form.
Yep.
B would not be correct
Okay.
because. Sorry, did you want me to?
Yeah,
stop
you know
there?
what? That's fine. Why don't you do B as well? That's fine. So B is not
B-
correct. That's right. It's not
I
correct.
would not be correct because it's to chop, then it's trim, and then to install, which is weird because you're changing your you're changing the format.
Exactly.
And then the same C is correct because you have chop or to chop, then you have trim and install.
Good. I mean, the thing to I think kind of figure this one out here is either the to is going to drop down and apply to all three of the things that follow, or none of them. So if it applies to none of them, then you got to repeat. What I mean is, only to this one, then you need to put it there and put it there. But if you're going to say to chop, and then I'm going to say, all right, this to is also going to follow here, to trim, then you set up a pattern. And here you are keeping the pattern by leaving the to off of it. So it can be to chop, this to is good for trim, and this to is good for install, which works here. I mean, these are A and C are just the mirror opposites of each other. But what you did was establish a pattern and you remain consistent. So here's one thing that I kind of, at a later point in the semester kind of talk about quite a bit, and I'll repeat this very, very often throughout the rest of our time writing essays together and talking about sentences. If there is a judgment call to be made, your job is to make the judgment call once and be consistent for the rest of your paper. If, like the reason that this one right here is wrong is because there's a judgment call to include the to and the chop here, and then you changed your mind here and you went back to the original here, which means it's not that part of this is correct and part of this is incorrect. What that says to the reader is the writer doesn't know what the writer is doing. So if you're going to use a semicolon, or if you're going to make one of these judgment calls, whether you're using passive voice, you having the reason in your mind to do so is going to convey a sense of confidence and clarity in your writing to the reader. So sometimes people put a comma after a list of three, in the list of three. The American flag is red, white, and blue. It's red, comma, white, comma, and blue. Some people leave it out. The American flag is red, comma, white, and blue. So that's a judgment call as to whether you want to do one. But if you have a bunch of lists in your paper and you do it differently each time, that just says to your reader that even if your reader isn't going to pick up on that, they're going to pick up on that something is different, and your voice, that kind of insecurity is going to present itself, and kind of, it's almost like a subliminal message, don't trust me. Think of it that way. It's because readers, I mean, nobody but an English teacher is going to correct your commas in your writing. But if your commas are all messed up, the reader is going to get to the end of it and go, I don't know about this one. And they're not going to know why, but that sense is going to be almost a subliminal force of having a conversation with somebody, but not looking them in the eye. What's that person hiding? I can't put my finger on it, but I don't feel right about it. So that's why it's really, really important to be consistent above all else. It's better to be consistent than correct. I know that's a controversial statement right there, but I think I will stand by that. It is better to be interesting than to be right. And it is better to be consistent than to be correct. And those are rules that I think you can take in writing, in the soft sciences, pretty far. So we'll relate back to that when we get back to conspiracies. However, that I think is plenty. Yeah, this is good. We got more of this stuff. I think everybody, it sounds like from the feedback that we got here and the people answering the questions that we have a pretty thorough understanding in the group of this difference between active and passive and parallel structure. I'm satisfied if you are. So the last thing I wanted to mention about parallel structure is that when you set up the pattern of I'm going to do this and then this and then this, I'm going to do it twice or three times. Twice is establishing a pattern. The third time is you have to fulfill the pattern. It's the part of speech that we're looking at. You can't change the part of speech of what comes in that pattern. You can change the ideas and you can change who's doing it or whatever, but you can't change, I'm doing a verb, noun, verb, noun, verb, noun, or I'm doing a noun, noun, noun. So you're gonna see a lot of things that are kind of like, if you take this rule a little too far and you wanna make everything super parallel, you're gonna start thinking of all sorts of things that need to be parallel that don't need to be parallel, just because it sounds like it has to sound exactly the same. It doesn't refer to subject matter, the content of what you're talking about. It refers to the part of speech of the words in that list. Good, any questions before we move on? How you guys feel? Okay, let's do. All right, we're still on screen share. So I'm gonna go to, where'd you go? I had a couple of these things open. Let's start with this. I'm going to put this, I put this up at the top of our resources page, which I'll just add a bunch more stuff to later. But this is OWL exercises. You know what? Let's just switch over here. I got the wrong thing. Wrong Purdue OWL page. So here we are at the top of our content. And I have a couple of links I'll show you. So resources, as you can see with your table of contents here, here's the welcome in week 1, 2, 3, 4. I just added this. So you'll see this is a new module. And this is what I wanted you to take a look at in OWL. So we're talking about, last time we were talking a little bit about whether a conspiracy theory is appropriate for, let's say, your argumentative paper that you're going to do later in the semester, or whether you want to explore it as a compare and contrast. Can we, you know, maybe you want to compare and contrast two theories, like President Kennedy was assassinated, it was an inside job, and let's lay that out. Besides 9/11 was an inside job. Let's lay down that those two. How are those two conspiracy theories, the similar or different? Or you want to go, well, was 9/11 an inside job? Let's evaluate that, or let's explore it, or something like that. So there are different formats, and the way that you phrase the question is extremely important, because what we're going to get here is a teensy little bit of a review about what qualifies as an academic source or an academically valid source. So in college writing. So there's something that basically we got to talk about a little bit, which are standards. And these standards you'll remember from your 100 class, your introductory writing class, as how do you evaluate a source of information? General guidelines. So there are basically a couple of criteria. One of my favorite words, criteria. Here are the criteria. You come across something and you want to discover if it's a source that you can use in your paper, or if it's a source that is unreliable, and therefore, because this is the problem, if you use unreliable information that doesn't meet these criteria, doesn't meet these standards, and you use that in your argumentation paper as evidence and come to the conclusion that this is the evidence, this proves my argument, what you're doing is you're asking for a failing grade, because the whole point of the argument essay is to find, evaluate, present, and argue with good, strong, university level evidence and examples. So you have to find out what you can about the author, who wrote this, and what's their background. So one thing that you can, this gets into, in the internet age, a little bit of a dicey situation, because somebody that's well known and published in the internet world, well, it used to be really simple. If you were well known in the publishing world, there was a whole infrastructure of people sitting in desks in New York, going over papers and researching things and checking you out and making sure that this publishing company wanted to put their press seal, Penguin Putnam, on that book and release it out into the world. Some people, some publishers would write their own prefaces and say, this is a bunch of garbage, but it's important for historical reasons that we don't forget what this is. So here's your copy of Mein Kampf. Please read it, knowing that this is a discredited anti-Semitic rant full of hate. And here's your book. So the publisher was there to put either in context or to filter out stuff that was nonsense. So now that we have the internet, everything's up there. Just simply being well known does not qualify you to be an authority on something. However, if you're well known, you can say that you're well known. Sometimes that's all you need to prove. So here, this is the thing, is if you're an expert, you should have some credentials in that field. If you're simply well known for doing stuff, you can use that in your paper as evidence, but not as long as you pretend that those are credentials by themselves. So I'm going to say that Ariana Grande is well known. That doesn't make her an expert on what is good and bad in the music world necessarily. I can just say that she's popular. So if she says this, you know, you can take her opinion with a grain of salt, but she is famous. So and that's the appropriate way to contextualize what you have there. Same way that you would have to contextualize data from, let's say, a climate change study. You would simply have to say, this is the data we have. Now, nobody can predict the future. We all recognize that, but the best models that we have predict that the average temperature of the sea levels will rise in this much over the next 10 years if we don't do anything about it. It's the best we got. Nobody says that's because the scientists found it, that it's just true, end of story, because we trust them. These are the wrong ways to couch this information. So you need to basically be able to contextualize what it is and why it is that you are presenting this information, and why it's going to serve your argument, how far it's going to serve your argument, for what purpose. So you have to, these used to be pretty common, clear, yeah, they used to be just clear categories. I think in a simpler time that people lived in. But over the course of my teaching career, everything here has changed. So if something is a fact, it's empirically provable. If something is an opinion, it should be stated as opinion. If something is propaganda, you might want to study it as propaganda itself, but it's not a good reason to say this is a thing that somebody said, therefore it is a fact. And that brings us to, let's say the last one is evidence and credentials. Evidence means citations. Evidence means that it comes from somewhere and you can check with that person where that comes from. If you have a reputation in the field, and here's an example that I brought up before, like you remember the Einstein example? And we were talking about that logical fallacy. Somebody asked a question about the logical fallacy. E equals mc squared is true because Einstein said it. No, it's not. That's a logical fallacy. Einstein did say E equals mc squared, but it's not true because he said it. He had a lot of evidence. He had mathematical proofs. He showed his work, and the work makes sense. Other people went over that work and got the same results. Yes, this is a valid proof. And we put all this stuff together to decide that E equals mc squared is in fact valid. There is a relationship between matter and energy, and it involves the constant, which is the speed of light squared. That's the relationship. So now let's go to the second part of that one. Einstein famously said one time, God does not play dice. And you guys remember that one? Anybody, can anybody contextualize that? What was he talking about? It's a pretty famous quote. It's used all the time to justify all sorts of things. So this is kind of a good one to kind of file away. When somebody does eventually, at some point in your life, you're going to hear this again as a justification for something. Anybody? How about this? It was, first you had the theory of relativity, right? General theory, specific theory of relativity, and this involves the heavenly bodies. This involves gravity, this involves all that stuff. You're looking at the telescope, you're looking out. But later on in the century, in the 20th century, we started looking at the molecules themselves. And are the molecules made up of smaller molecules? Are there parts to a molecule? Are there parts to an atom? When you break the atom up and you look at these things, then you got what was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. This should be sounding familiar to everybody at college, right? You don't exactly know where those things are. They might be here, they might be there. Little quarks are this way and they're spinning that way. Quantum physics. When this was brought up to Einstein in his later years, he said, there's no randomness about this. God doesn't play dice. That's quantum physics is nonsense, is basically what he's saying. This new theory that's out there. Now, since then, if he had lived long enough to today, he would have to revise the statement because there's a ton of evidence that has promoted that hypothesis at the time to be a well-established theory with tons of stuff, you know, and is very, very valid. And that this is, you know, the proof in the pudding was that, you know, we can make atomic bombs and stuff like that. So we kind of understand how this stuff works because we can do stuff with it. So that's the thing is, even if there is an expert opinion about something, it simply doesn't make it true. And that's in Einstein's case about his field. Einstein wasn't giving us cooking recipes or, you know, movie reviews. And he's going to say, you know, Greta Garbo is the greatest actress of all time. Who cares? You're a physicist, right? This was about physics. This was about his field. He was still wrong. And that's Einstein. So that's what you have to do. It's the evidence that speaks for itself. So that brings us to conspiracy theories. So what's, let's get some, so I'm going to open up my chat window. You can type it in, you can verbally speak it, you can start waving your hands up and down. What is a conspiracy theory? Can we define it? Well, how about just what's a conspiracy first and foremost? Not even without the theory, but just the conspiracy part. What's a conspiracy? Conspiracy theory. Good. Keep going. Something's not proven. That's the theory part, right? So what is a conspiracy? The two of you, let's say everybody in this class, we're going to get together and we're going to have a conspiracy to do something. The conspiracy is that we are going to all secretly drink hot chocolate every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. in our separate places, and nobody's going to know about it. We're going to be the only ones that know. It's our little secret. That's a conspiracy. Exactly. So we got a couple of things that are coming up there. Because there's two parts to this, right? The conspiracy is a secret agreement. It has to be both an agreement. So there have to be more than one person. You can have a conspiracy of 2. You can have a conspiracy of 3. You can have a conspiracy of 100. The thing is, you're supposed to keep it secret. And that's the whole point of this agreement. Otherwise, it's just an agreement. We can all agree to drink hot chocolate. Tell all your friends too. But the moment I say, let's all do this and keep it a secret, it's a conspiracy. Now back to Justin's point, the theory part has to do with theory hypothesis, right? Now, in the strictest sense, you don't call a scientific theory a theory until it's proven past the hypothesis stage. It's no longer a proposition. We've analyzed the data and come up with the stuff for it. So it has those now in this sense, in the general language, we talk about theory as if it simply were a hypothesis. Oh, I got a theory about that. No, you don't. You don't have any evidence. You got a hypothesis about it. That's what we literally mean by it. But figuratively, what we mean is I got an idea, haven't explored it yet, haven't been proven. But here's my theory about why people love strawberry ice cream. But there's no evidence for that, right? It's actually just a hypothesis that's never going to be proven. But we'll call it a theory because that's the way we use language today. So it's an idea about something that works, and included in that idea is there is a secret agreement between people of power to do that. That's what a conspiracy theory is. So what are the, let's make a running list. You can verbally shout them out. Let's get a list also in the chat. What are all the names of the conspiracy theories that you can think of? Yep, moon landing was faked. That's a good one. 9/11. So what about 9/11? Be more specific, please. Well, I haven't heard that one, JC.
I don't believe in any of these. I just think like conspiracy theories are funny.
Sure.
Like the steel beams, the building, like 7, like the CIA building that went down.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, like that, like yeah, basically that it was like, I don't know, government that took down the building.
Right. There are the part about 9/11 being an inside job, or 9/11 not going down because of the planes. It was because explosives were inside.
Yeah.
A lot of these things. I mean, I heard this. So I was in New York, in Lower Manhattan on September 11th. I had just moved there the month before, the shittiest timing of any move that I've ever made. And I was late for work. It was like shortly after 9 o'clock. And I was walking out of my subway stop uptown from like Soho Street, somewhere around there, about 1 mile north of the Trade Center. And everybody was looking the other way. And I'm just like, after a while, I'm like, I'm not only late for work, I'm apparently looking the wrong way. And I looked around and the first building was on fire already. And so, that whole day was just obviously nuts. And many hours of therapy later, I can talk about it. But the long and short of it was people were spouting all sorts of nonsense all day in the street, and then we had the CNN type coverage of 24 hours just watching the film of it go over and over and over again. And living in New York, I got the New York Times all the time, and so there were two things that I followed when I was kind of like interested in doing so. And then sometimes I just had to take a media break altogether and just not pay attention to that because we were like just trying to deal. So one of them was the massive amounts of the months and months and months of daily obituaries that they took to in the New York Times to go over everybody that was missing after a certain amount of time and give them an obituary in the New York Times. 3,000, however many people, 3,300, something like that. And the other one was they had some civil engineers, some structural engineers, some different engineers write some op-eds about this kind of all of a sudden theory that it was not the planes that brought it down, or a plane hit the Empire State Building once and it didn't fall down, and what the differences were and all this kind of stuff. And it's been almost 20 years since I read that article, but I hear this all the time. Even on the day, somebody said, there's no way they could have fallen by themselves. That's not how buildings fall. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, you asshole, what do you know about buildings falling down? You're an editor in a publishing company that publishes like, chemistry journal. You don't know anything about it. So how do buildings fall? Oh, they would have fallen like that. It wouldn't have gone straight down. And we have these dumb conversations with people that don't have any evidence about it. And so you can get to the bottom of this if you want to look for evidence. However, the people that are saying, I think I know what happened, it's all conjecture. There is no evidence behind that. That's kind of the whole point of the conspiracy theory, is that, how do you explain this? Is the essential question that distinguishes it from an adult conversation that we would have in the university and a kind of people arguing on the street. Oh yeah, well, how do you account for this? You can take it with the moon landing. What's the main thing about the moon landing? Oh, it's faked. It was all done because the flag was blowing and there wasn't, in the picture there, the shadows were weird and it was a vacuum. And so there was just shouldn't have been any wind, but the flag looks like it was blowing. How do you explain that? Oh, I don't know. And I don't have to know, because I don't have to defend every detail that you don't understand in order to make this thing true. If you were to ask yourself, what would have to happen for your theory of it being faked, like the moon landing being faked, to be true, you are looking at an enormous amount of things that have to happen, all opposed to the other explanation, which is you don't understand photography. Which one is, the Russians had to be in on it back in the 60s and agree that we went on to the moon and said, you know what, it's probably a good idea for us to go along with this horseshit that the states are pulling and just say they landed on the moon for one reason or another. But that would have had to have happened for the moon landing to have been faked. That we would have had to have somehow convinced the Russians to just keep their mouth shut. Or the person you're talking to doesn't understand photography. Which one is more likely? That the person that thinks the building 9/11 doesn't understand the civil engineering of construction materials to a sufficient degree to analyze whether that's how buildings fall or not, or every single federal insider, all the people working on this, decided that murdering 3,300 people was something that I'm just going to go ahead and keep my mouth shut about. Because you don't have anybody actually saying, I was there, this is what happened. It's all ideas. Oh yeah, well, so that's why I really wanted to make clear this one point in particular. Oh yeah, well, how do you explain this part? I don't know, and I don't have to know. The burden of evidence is for the conspiracy theorist to provide a more accurate, more provable narrative than the one that is generally accepted, that we did actually go to the moon. So that's the thing, is you're never going to get a real argument about this stuff. You're just going to see people that aren't photographers talking about the problems with the lighting in the photography. You can talk about people that don't know anything about atmosphere talking about the waving, and the waving of the flag or the non-waving of the flag. Or you're going to talk about people, you're going to get this kind of thing of, I don't understand it, so it must be a conspiracy. So that's pretty much what it comes down to. So now that's classic stuff. I don't understand it. So how do you explain this? Now, in the last couple of years, we have moved on. We have gotten to a whole new level. So I was watching this one and I put it up here for you. I'm going to go ahead and screen share here now. So first and foremost, while I'm changing screens here, does anybody want to share, ask a question, add a comment? How about how about a little discussion from you guys before we go into the screen share? What do you guys think?
I think it's interesting. I was just watching a documentary called the Social Dilemma on Netflix, and how it was said that we went from the information age to the disinformation age. Yeah. And just how crazy everything is now. So it's interesting when you talk about validity of people, experts even in their fields. Yeah. So.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just because I'm getting old and I've seen some of these things evolve over decades. I mean, remember, I grew up in the 80s and I was in 6th grade when Flock of Seagulls came out with their new album, and Prince was putting out new stuff all the time when I was in middle school. And so we used to look forward to, as a long part of my life that was what are you going to do for New Year's Eve on 1999? Are we going to how are you going to party like it's 1999? Because that was still a ways off during part of my life. So this is a retro thing to say now, because pretty much I think everybody that I'm talking to here has 1999 as a ancient history thing, the way I kind of think of World War II. It was just over before I got there. It's done. But these things have definitely evolved. And the conversations around climate change have, since the 80s, when we first started talking about this stuff, and it was kind of on everybody's mind, have changed so much. And to have, it has gone full circle to complete general acceptance because you would have looked like an absolute moron to get up there publicly on television and say, the scientists don't know what they're talking about. You would be laughed off the stage. You would be voted out of office immediately, no matter where you were in the country. That was true in the early 2000s, late 90s. And since then, you can not only get away with it, but it's actually a rallying call to deny what was previously thoroughly accepted, and only more evidence is coming to confirm it, right? So this is a very weird thing to see the country go through, like all of the denial. And, back in the 1980s, you could hear the president of Exxon trying to blow holes into all these theories and stuff like that. And then there was just one scandal after another of, they were faking evidence. Those scientists, they're just those greedy scientists that want those government grants to do their research. That's one you hear a lot, right? Because you guys know how much money there is in government research grants, right? Yeah. There's no easier buck. Yeah. And then, just to kind of evolve. So we used to say, oh yeah, well then how do you explain this? Now we say, here's a ridiculous proposition, prove me wrong, or it's right. We don't even say, how do you explain this? We just pretend, we just go out there. And this particular thing right here, this documentary is kind of about that jump. I'm gonna show it to you right now. It is, I watched I don't know if you guys ever had Frontline. Ever seen a show on PBS called Frontline? But it's a long format investigative journalism show, and they've got dozens, maybe even hundreds by now. This one is called The United States of Conspiracy, and you can watch it for free. It's about an hour, right here on PBS. And they take just all sorts of stuff. There was lots of great stuff on Al-Qaeda. There was lots of great stuff on, they always have something on the elections, but the actual, this is what it's called. Yeah, the United States of Conspiracy was an in-depth analysis of Alex Jones and how we kind of went from a fringe movement to the campaign manager for Trump being a guest on Alex Jones's show back in the early days when he first started running and solidifying support. And this is kind of one of the more interesting things. Remember, Alex Jones was the one who said that Sandy Hook, the massacre of all the school children, was faked by the government, and all those parents were actors. And this father still has to live in hiding because he gets death threats all the time because some crazy people have taken it upon themselves to call this person who lost their child at Sandy Hook, and call that person a liar and an actor, and I'm going to kill you, and you can't get away with this. And so he had to move over and over, and basically just has to live in hiding now because there's still enough crazy people out there that are trying to kill him. Go ahead.
What's your opinion on the Sandy Hook conspiracy?
No, I mean, there's no real, it's kind of like saying, what's your opinion of apple pie? Well, it's delicious. It's the Sandy Hook conspiracy is a bunch of nonsense, and it actually happened. And the parents who lost those children were not actors hired by a government to incite to take away your guns. So that, I mean, they're saying the most ridiculous thing that is easily refutable. You could find out if all these people were actors before, then you could find out these are things you can kind of verify. So this is a very long exploration. I'd say probably about from, minute 12 to about minute 30 is an investigation of just how that happened. But they have, in this particular documentary, they have people that used to do video editing for Alex Jones and stuff like that, just talk about what it was like to be in the room when he was coming up with this stuff at first. So I used to think that Alex Jones was just opportunistic because, he sells like vitamin supplements for potency, and he has like an online store, or had an online store for like survival gear and stuff like that. And I thought he was just spouting a bunch of stuff because it was in his interest to do so because he can make a lot of money. But I think he's actually just mentally ill. Now, after taking a closer look at this, I think him being an opportunist and making a lot of money off it is kind of beside the point. I think he's actually a psychopath. But that's just me. Having looked at him quite a bit through this documentary, but I remember the time when somebody, when I was teaching at community college, came up and wanted to use to me in one of my classes and wanted to use InfoWars as citable evidence because they're a journalistic source for their research paper for English 101 at a community college. And I'm like, I never really thought I'd have to deal with this. They're not journalists, and the fact that we got to go into this is kind of like scary. And then from there, it just, it became kind of a normal thing to have to at least address them. So this is the thing here. They mentioned this very kind of interesting jump that we no longer have conspiracy theories. We simply have conspiracies. People just say, this is the thing. There's no, how do you explain this part? There's no theory. There's no alternate story. It's just whatever happens. They can just make some stuff up and they just go with it. And it's true simply because they're asserting it to be so. So they're not taking something that's there. Like, I can show you the actual photograph of the moon landing, and I can show you how the shadows are all messed up, and I can show you the flag. They're doing away with the photograph and just saying just nonsense out of their heads with nothing, not even a photograph to back it up. I mean, the whole thing about the JFK murder and that being a conspiracy is there's a lot of things that don't make sense about that. And so we can take a look at the Zapruder film and we can say, well, it didn't look like one bullet killed him. It looked like three, and it looked like, you can do all this stuff, but we're actually using real footage from a film to establish this kind of physical evidence argument about the assassination of JFK. But now just forget the film. Just say it was Russians. Say it was aliens. Say it was somebody's grandma. Prove me wrong. Prove it wasn't your grandma that shot JFK. That's what it is. So the theory is gone from it now. And people are much more likely to start accepting as a general theory, based on a general narrative, something that has not just bad evidence or misguided or poorly argued evidence, but no evidence whatsoever. So that's the thing about the Sandy Hook conspiracy, is that it was a conspiracy with no theory. It had no evidence. There was no reason to think this. You couldn't even mention any inconsistencies in a story that required further explanation. And that's usually where conspiracy theories come from. There's some inconsistencies in a story. It requires further explanation. I got a wild idea of how it can make sense, but here's what it is. There was none of that here. So I don't know. Does that...
I have something that's kind of...
Please.
That terrifies me, I guess, about conspiracies. Yeah. It's that a lot of the time, your evidence that you use on them is actually evidence that they somehow use to enforce their theories. Like, the U.S. government is denying that they are involved in X, Y, and Z. And by that denial, that's actually reinforcing. See, of course they would deny it. Of course they would deny it. If they didn't have anything to deny, they wouldn't say anything. But they deny it, therefore it is real. Or with the Sandy Hook, they go, hey, one of these people were actors, but, the rest of them, it doesn't say anything about actors. Well, of course it doesn't say anything about them being actors beforehand. The CIA scrubbed all that. You wouldn't be able to find that they're actors, but they missed this one person. They missed this. And you go, well, yeah, out of a class of how many people, the chance that one parent is an actor, sure, that makes logical sense. But, them, they can use the evidence against them as just reinforced, like, well, the government's covering it up. And that is, which is terrifying, which is really scary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's where you have to kind of sharpen your skills just a little bit. And this is why I put here, let me show you this one thing, because I wanted to contrast what crazy conspiracy sounds like with, somebody here did bring up the Edward Snowden thing. They actually were spying on us when somebody said, hey, they're all spying on us. No, they aren't. That sounds like a crazy conspiracy. Well, this is what the difference is. So I don't know if it's just a similarity that this has been coming up but I got a Joe Rogan podcast for you. 3 hours long conversation last year with Edward Snowden, and he lays out what happened from his perspective. He just wrote a book about it, so he's got a new interview up on the Joe Rogan Experience just this last couple of weeks, actually. But the one from a year ago is where he recounts the episode. So the recent interview is very good as well, but this one has to do with directly like what we're talking about. When the government is saying, no, there's nothing to see here, and there is something to see here, there actually is a conspiracy to have everybody's mouth shut. And Edward Snowden, a whistleblower, comes out and says, this is not what's happening. Here's what is happening. He laid out tons of evidence as an insider that is irrefutable that it's happening that way. So that's kind of the difference. It's Edward Snowden wasn't some guy that suspected it happened and said, for the argument, well, they would say that because they're trying to cover it up. He was there saying, I took evidence while I was an employee for these people, and I can show you what they did. Here it is. That's the difference. So in order to make that call, you have to have evidence from a whistleblower, basically. That's what whistleblowers are. That's the essential difference. So he felt so kind of, insulted as an American, as a patriot, that his privacy, that he was involved in this privacy, this surveillance that the government was doing, that he thought this needs to be in the public sphere, so I'm going to take it out. He was an employee. He was working at that place that did the surveillance. It's very different than somebody saying, this doesn't add up, conspiracy, prove me wrong. There's nothing there to evidence with. So that argument that they would lie. Well, can you show me something that illustrates that they are lying? Not just that they would lie if they could, so they are. That's not an argument. There's no evidence there. That's what the difference is.
Before it was proven, though, before Edward Snowden came forward, could it have been considered a conspiracy that just was proven correct?
So a conspiracy theory is the attempt at explaining why something secretive is going on, right? So a conspiracy is a secret agreement between those in power to keep something concealed from the public.
Okay, so then
he's saying, yes, there actually is. So what we're kind of talking about difference is the way that we use this. When we shout at somebody, oh, that's just a conspiracy theory, what we're saying is, don't look at this. It's nonsense. So when someone comes up with a legitimate concern, such as the American government was doing medical experiments in third world countries that we had access to with human guinea pigs. Oh shit, that happened. And you know why? We have the evidence. We have the documents. The doctors all signed the records and stuff like that. Now, without the records, without the photographs, without all this kind of stuff, it was like malaria research back in the 40s or 50s, somewhere in Central America. It was bad, real bad. That was definitely a conspiracy. And it's no longer a theory because we have evidence that proves that it was done. It was acknowledged, and Obama, as a president, at some point said that he made a formal apology on behalf of the United States that this should have never happened, and there were victims here that were abused. So no longer a conspiracy; it's out in the open, solved. Right? The theory is that lizard people are doing this kind of stuff, and it's still secret. And here's why. I'll explain to you why. It's because the Illuminati have a deal with the aliens and etc. There's no evidence for any of this stuff, though. So what the difference is evidence. Not, can't you explain this? That's not evidence. I can't, the photograph doesn't make sense to me. It's Edward Snowden brought out the data and left when he was stealing the data, he left his own personal electronic signature on the data that he was stealing. So there would be no doubt about it that he's the one who took it. And he was going to get caught. He went to Hong Kong and then started releasing this stuff to journalists, knowing that the only way to do it was not anonymously. He had to take responsibility for it in order for it to be legitimate. And so he decided to put himself in harm's way that way to release the government surveillance program to journalists. What do you think? Questions, comments? I want to hear from you guys.
I think that makes sense because my mom has one friend who likes to rant about all these conspiracy theories, and that, like, for example, like JFK being shot, and that his grandson is in hiding right now and is going to come out of the woodworks with like the election, and I'm just like, what? Like, where's the actual evidence? Like, I was so confused. So like having evidence gives more people like solidarity, I guess, because it's not just a thought. There's actual proven scientific evidence to prove it.
Right. And people hold a lot of emotional attachment to what could have been had Kennedy not been shot. And that's where a lot of that energy has gone, was like, it was just, things were dark in America after that. Vietnam cranked up and people were burning their draft cards. And it was just like, before that, you know, you had some disgruntled beatniks, but nobody really paid attention to them. And then after that, it was kind of like, shit, the world's kind of going crazy here. And why are we killing children in villages in Vietnam again? That doesn't sound like something I want to be involved. Like, this is bad stuff. Government's lying to you. And so a lot of people feel like they could never trust anything that's coming out, because the original whistleblower is Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers. You guys remember that one from the Vietnam War? Everything up until, I believe it was 1967, 1969, I can't remember exactly when he came out with them, that the government had told the United States population about the Vietnam War was a lie. And Daniel Ellsberg was the whistleblower who took all of those classified documents. He worked for an analysis company over in the Rand Corporation, which is still there today in Palo Alto. And he was hired as a consultant for the Pentagon to start looking at the history of the Vietnam War and start making some recommendations. And he said, wow, there's so much bullshit going on with this, right back to Eisenhower, which wasn't supposed to have existed, that I think everybody in the public should know about this. And had it not been for a technicality, he would still be in a dark hole today, Daniel Ellsberg, for what he did, for telling the actual truth, leaking these classified documents that Eisenhower was directly involved in subverting the Geneva Conventions so that an election could not take place in Vietnam. Help out the French. We need to give the French a win. Let's give them their colony back. Wasn't supposed to happen. That was illegal, according to international law. The Geneva Conventions, the laws that we made, that was illegal. So that started a history of extreme lying about what was going on over there. And so we needed evidence. So the evidence that Daniel Ellsberg brought forth was actual, original, classified documents, tens of thousands of pages from the White House, from the CIA, from the intelligence services, and let the actual documents out. And they put them out there in the press, the Washington Post and the New York Times later. And so that's the difference. It's the evidence. So the thing about the JFK assassination is that everybody said, okay, what happened? And we came out with the Warren Commission. Now, the Warren Commission was not done very well. And because the explanation doesn't explain exactly what happened, and there are some obvious holes in it, then people come up with the alternate theory, which doesn't have evidence, but what it is evidence that the Warren Commission sucked and didn't do a very good job. So for your, just for, this is kind of off topic, but just one thing about that I just kind of happened to, out of all of the stuff surrounding the JFK assassination and the Warren Commission in particular, like why, how could it not be a conspiracy? Look at the absolute nonsense that the Warren Commission is. Single bullets and this, we have all sorts of evidence that says that's not true. Well, Earl Warren, this is one explanation I heard that sounds pretty reasonable. Government said, we're going to have a panic here. And so we're going to get our trusted guy, Earl Warren, to go out there and reassure everybody. So your job, Earl Warren, here's all the evidence we got. We already caught the guy. His name's Lee Harvey Oswald. Make it fit. Okay. And so we did. So the evidence that doesn't fit that narrative that he started with, he had to make it fit. That was his job. So he did. Best he could. Were there two shooters? Yeah, probably. So there was more going on, for sure. But what it is, doesn't, the guilt that somebody was full of shit in the Warren Commission doesn't prove that all of these other things did happen. We need evidence we know something else happened, but we just don't know what. And now that we're this far away from it in history, we may never know anything more about the story other than unsubstantiated explanations. There's no new evidence being put out there for it, so it's kind of rough. What do you think? Have you ever, Emily? Have you ever engaged this friend about this issue?
No, I mean she goes off on tangents, and it's not mine. It's my mom's friend, but
Right.
She'll say something and then she'll go on a tangent about another thing, kind of involving that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, I've never been one to believe conspiracy theories or conspiracies in general. So it's like hearing her talk about it was just like people actually like think some things are real when like there's no scientific evidence to prove that it is.
Yeah.
It's just interesting to me.
Yeah. So I mean, the question about what to do with that is a very important question. How much you want to engage with that, and I mean, I think more often than not, my tendency to how to react to people that tend to just kind of associatively go on to that connects to this other crazy thing and this other crazy thing is, I mean, I think the weirdest one that I had was I went to graduate school in the South, and it's a very different world in Virginia in the South. It wasn't that far deep South, but we still had some kind of like Confederate stuff going on. And one time at a party in graduate school, I met a black dude wearing a jacket with the Confederate flag on it. And I'm like, that makes perfect sense. Do you? I want nothing to do with this crazy, I have no idea. My friend that I was there with in graduate school, just, he made me look like a big tough guy, but it was his sister's house. And he was like, I'm not backing down to any of it. No. And he's sitting there going, God, that is just pitiful to this big biker dude. He's a big biker dude. He was with this other big biker dude who was a white guy. And they were both wearing Confederate flags. And I'm sitting here just going like, why do you want to engage with these people? I mean, like, I'm from California. I don't know. This isn't my fight. I don't know what to do with this. And I certainly don't want to get into a fight with a black Confederate biker who wants the South to rise again. So this thing went on for a while. It was, oh, well, half of my family's black, half of my family is white. They're, from Irish immigrants. And if I didn't support the American or the Confederate flag, I'd be insulting my one half of my family. Is that what you think I should do is pick one side of my family over the other one? And I'm like, kind of seems like that's what you are doing, but that's not what I'm going to say. But, my friend said that, growing up as his dad was Turkish and he grew up in that town in Roanoke, Virginia. And he said getting pulled over by the cops and having my dad with a Turkish accent speak to the cops was the most terrifying thing I could imagine as a child. So I don't put up with that shit anymore. Even if a biker's going to beat me up over it, I don't let that Confederate stuff fly anymore. I'm like, we all kind of looked at each other like we're all kind of new in this graduate program. We're like, come on, you're my hero. That's so awesome. Like, I would have just not engaged. But sometimes, especially if it's closer to home, this was his family's house in the home that he grew up in. He had since moved to New York and then come back for graduate school. And his name was Kevin Kamal Ayildiz. Is a great name, right? And he was like, yeah, I don't care. I am not remaining silent. And these people were yelling and shouting and wanted to fight him. And he's like, I'm not getting up. This is my house. You leave. We're sitting there just kind of floored. It was really just, I didn't have the imagination to figure out why this guy would be wearing a Confederate flag when he was clearly black. He said he was half black, but he was very visually like, there's no denying that half. It's there. And I'm like, this is just the strangest. South's a different world now. So I don't know. At a certain point, that's a very important question. How much are you going to engage with people that seem just absolutely ridiculous to you? Because they vote too. Their vote's just as powerful as yours is. I try to vote as early and as often as I can. Unfortunately, that only turns out to be once. But as the old adage goes, early and often, it's a joke. But I think we should probably wrap it up here. I'm going to stick around right now. I'm going to stop the recording right now. And so I'm going to stick around for just kind of an impromptu office hour. I wasn't really available earlier this morning because my power was kind of on and off. So I'll stick around for anybody that wants to talk about either this assignment, grammar, or more about conspiracy theories, but I would highly recommend checking out the resources page on the first module, and you can see a full documentary with Edward Snowden, who is a very, very articulate person and makes a lot of sense. And what that sounds like when the government's trying to cover something up, that's what it sounds like. And then you can see the documentary about conspiracy theories and how they've grown in the United States on Frontline. And that's what conspiracy theories sound like, that don't have any evidence, that aren't even really theories anymore. And those are kind of like things to be up on, I think, as we enter looking for evidence, taking a side on an issue, moving forward into an election season. I think those are great things. So feel free to log off. I'll stick around and talk to anybody about anything you want. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, you guys.
Professor.
Thank you.